Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint jack-o'-lantern gnome on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. I'm going to go ahead and go over all the materials for this, quite a few colors for this one. We have Mars Black, Titanium White, Primary Yellow, Deep Violet, Brilliant Purple, Cad Red Medium Hue, Raw Sienna, Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, and Raw Umber. Most of these are the Liquitex basics, although there's a few off-brands like Artist Loft in there. Feel free to use whatever brand of paint you have available. So I also used a toothbrush and this makeup blender brush. You do not have to use that blender brush. I like to use this brush in backgrounds every once in a while because it really gives this kind of like smooth, almost airbrush effect in the background. That is an optional brush. You can also give that smooth look or get that smooth look with like a 3/4 flat brush. So I also used that 3/4 flat brush and a number 4 round brush. And I used POSCA paint pens for the detail work in this, specifically a black, yellow, and white POSCA paint pen. So I used the yellow for the moon, the stars. I used the black for the spider and bats, and that white one I used for the stars. If you don't have paint pens, you can use like a detail brush and black, yellow, and white paint for those details. I am going to start by painting the background. So we have a 11 by 14 inch canvas. It's placed vertically, and I'm loading my palette with Deep Violet, Brilliant Purple, and some Titanium White. We're going to start with our 3/4 flat wash brush, and we are going to load that into the water and kind of tap it dry. I'm going to start with our darker purple. That's that Deep Violet, and we're going to start at the top. Big angled strokes of paint, loading my brush with a lot of that paint. So my strokes are just kind of going in different angles, filling up about the top quarter of this canvas. It's almost like I'm just scribbling that paint on the canvas. And when you have about a quarter of that sky filled up, let's load that into the Brilliant Purple without rinsing. And let's start blending this together. So this is kind of weird because that Deep Violet's a warm purple, and this one's more of a cool purple. So it's going to blend kind of weird at first, but it ended up being okay. We're again doing these like angled strokes and painting another kind of quarter of the canvas. And before this dries, I am going to get this blender brush. Again, this is just like a makeup foundation brush. And without loading any paint on this brush, there's no paint, there's no water on this brush. I'm just gently kind of blending those colors together and going in kind of like this swirl direction. And that's going to start giving you that sort of like soft airbrush effect. So if you don't have the blender brush, you can do the kind of the same thing with a dry 3/4 wash brush. So that brush that we just used, you can dry that off, get all the water off, and kind of use that to blend your colors together. And it works best to blend them before they dry. So then I'm going to grab Titanium White without rinsing that brush. So this is that 3/4 wash brush. And I'm going to do the same thing, these kind of scribble angled strokes with this white. So you may want to add just a little bit of white at a time. Too much white will kind of take over. So you see how that just kind of was too bright. So I'm grabbing more of that Brilliant Purple in there. I'm going to get my blender brush and start doing swirled circle strokes, and it is blending that. So I'm not pressing hard on this brush at all, it's very lightly. And this white, I'm going to bring that kind of up into the top part. So we kind of want the top part of the sky to be a little bit darker, but we want this sort of light glow around where that gnome is going to be. And the gnome is going to take up much of that middle part of the canvas. So we want to create, there's like a piece of crud in my brush. We want to create like a glowing color in the center, but the top part, kind of the sides, are a little bit darker. So basically, I'm just going to kind of go back and forth with this brush, and you can see how it creates some really pretty interesting effects with the background colors. And I'm not going to continue getting lighter here. I'm going to add some more of this brilliant purple. So more angled scribble strokes, and then go back with the blender to spiral it around and blend that in. I am going to leave about 1 to 1.5 inch gap on the bottom of the canvas. There's going to be this dark gray hill that our gnome will be standing on. So we don't need to paint the sky all the way to the bottom of the canvas unless you want to, unless it feels more comfortable just to paint the whole canvas, that's fine. But again, spiraling this around, blending it. You want to be careful not to over blend it. So sometimes it's tempting to just keep blending and blending, and then all of a sudden you have everything looks the same color. So you want to kind of keep in mind that I like to have like color variation in the background. So some dark purples, light purples, the white. But if you keep going, it's all going to kind of just mesh together. So you have to force yourself to stop sometimes. I'm going to go back up and actually add some darker up at the top of the sky. And let's see. More of that deep violet color, and then blend this down. So the paint that was originally up here is not really that workable because it had dried, but adding more of that darker purple and then blending this down into some of the color down here that's still kind of workable, just to kind of help with that transition of that dark warm purple to that light cool purple. So very interesting, pretty purple background for our Halloween gnome. When you're done with this step, you want to go ahead and rinse off both of those brushes, and let's load Mars Black and perhaps some fresh titanium white on your palette if you need a little bit more titanium white. And we're going to paint a dark gray hill on the bottom. So let's grab our 3/4 flat. That blender brush soaks up a lot of water, so I'm not going to clean it just yet. We are done with that blender brush, by the way, so if you wanted to kind of set that to the side, you can. I'm going to grab the Mars Black, this is a 3/4 flat brush, and I'm going to start painting this hill. So if that bottom part of this purple part of the sky is still kind of wet, that should be okay. This black is pretty strong color, so if there's purple that's meshing with it, it's not going to make that big of a difference. I'm going to grab a little bit of the titanium white and kind of bring that or blend that white into that black. I can use the tip of the brush to really kind of define that hilly area. So if I were to measure this hill from the bottom of the canvas to the center sort of highest peak, it's a little under 3 inches, so it's about 2.75 inches. So if you like measurements, if you want to know that your hill's kind of the right size, that's about how high mine is. Yours, you can definitely make yours higher or lower too. It's just the little hill that the gnome is going to be standing on. And that's basically it. Just kind of gently blended that white in there to turn it into like a dark to medium gray color. I'm going to add a little bit more white in there, kind of in the center. But I didn't over blend it, so I just kind of left it like that, streaky and not blended all the way. The last thing I'm going to do to this background before I let this dry is do the little splatter stars. So I'm using a toothbrush. I'm applying titanium white and a little bit of water to the toothbrush, and I tested it kind of on my palette to make sure that it wasn't going to be too drippy or too thick. And I'm just kind of flicking little white stars throughout the sky. It's going to give you a little bit of a galaxy effect by doing the splatter stars, and because we did that sort of kind of airbrushed sky background. But we're just going to add a little bit more white to my palette here so that I can get some thicker stars, but not too drippy. There we go. And then later on, we can use paint pen to kind of draw some star shapes, but that gives you some more depth and interest in your sky background. So for this, we're going to let this dry, and the next step is going to be drawing our gnome. I'm going to draw this with a regular piece of white chalk, and I am about 7.5 inches from the bottom of the canvas. I'm going to draw a nose. So our gnome is going sideways kind of, so we want our nose to be kind of going slanted up. And then on top of that slanted nose, I'm going to draw the first part of the hat. So the bottom part of the hat kind of rests on his nose, and kind of like a squiggly line, kind of slanting down because our gnome is walking towards the left. And then our hat is also kind of going to the side. So I'm going to draw this hat almost all the way to the top of the canvas. Little sketch marks as I'm drawing. The hat starts to get very narrow, goes to a point very quickly, and this one's going to kind of spiral around, so kind of a curvy loop end of the hat. And then I'm going to start to kind of sketch his beard, but because he's walking towards the left, the beard is going to be kind of swaying towards the left. We still want to make it kind of look like he's kind of turned on its side. So I'm going to sketch this beard so that it sways more to the left and goes to a point. And we see his robe, so the lower right part of his robe. That goes down to about where that hill line is. It's about the same length, and it hits that top of that hill. It can kind of dip down a little bit. We can make our robe a little bit wavy at the bottom. That beard, by the way, is the same width as the hat. We don't need to sketch all the hairs on the beard. We can paint those in later. We just have the basic shape. And then, so we have his shoe. So this shoe is going to be, both of the shoes are going to be pointing towards the left. So this one is supposedly flat on the ground, or at least that's the plan, to make it look like it's flat on the ground. Just like a basic boot shape. This one, it's going to look like he's taken a step. It's also going to be facing towards the left, but it's going to be kind of diagonally upwards. So we can draw the heel of the boot, and the rest of it, we just see the side of it, and it's angling upwards. So now it looks like he's walking. And then we can draw our basic pumpkin shape, so we kind of know the placement of this. This pumpkin is going to be covering up a lot of his beard. He's going to be holding that big jack-o'-lantern. So I'm just going to kind of draw this oval shape. The width of the pumpkin is about 4.5 inches, a little bit less than 4.5 inches, but that doesn't have to be exact. You can kind of measure that. And so we want to kind of draw the pumpkin so it's kind of angled diagonally, sort of upwards. So it's not going horizontally. He's holding the pumpkin, and there's that little stem at the top. We can draw his arm. So we have part of his sleeve that's kind of going down. His little hand is going to be overlapping and holding that pumpkin. And next I'm going to kind of draw these sort of curved lines on the pumpkin, starting in the center to kind of give it more of an oval shape in the center, and then a few more kind of curved lines on the left and the right to kind of give that pumpkin a little bit more form. And we can draw our cute little spider attached to the hat, so like a wavy line, little circle for the body, and 8 legs. And then I'm going to do our crescent moon that's in the upper left part of this. Did a few little kind of wavy lines below the boots. We're going to add shadow there later on. And then our crescent moon. That is it for the drawing portion. This chalk, by the way, can erase with a wet baby wipe. So if you needed to erase any part of the drawing, you're welcome to. Let's go ahead and load our palette with raw sienna and freshen up your titanium white if you need some fresh titanium white on your palette. We're going to start by painting the nose of our gnome, and I'll be using a number 4 round brush. Let's load that number 4 round brush in equal parts titanium white and raw sienna. It's going to make kind of a light to medium, sort of light brown to beige color. And let's just paint that oval, solid coat of this color. And then what I like to do before this dries is add a little bit of shadowing in here. So I'm going to grab just the brown, so that raw sienna, that darker color, and blend that darker color just on the bottom of the nose. So that's going to give it kind of a little bit of a shadowy effect on the bottom. And then grab the white and blend a little bit of white right there at the top. Gives it kind of a brighter color. Ended up being a little bit too much white, so I had to go back in with some more of the brown to kind of redo that. So a little bit of lightness at the top, a little bit of darkness at the bottom. We can always go back in with like a second coat over the nose if needed. I'm going to do the hat next. So we have a candy corn style hat. We have yellow, orange, and white, different color blocks. And we're going to start at the bottom with the yellow. So this is primary yellow, still using the number 4 round brush. If I were to just paint this yellow, it's going to be too see-through. So what we want to do is we want to add titanium white into our yellow, and that's going to brighten that yellow and also give it really good coverage so we're not seeing the purple background under the yellow. So I am double loading my round brush in the yellow and the white, about equal parts, maybe a little bit less white because otherwise our yellow would be kind of too pastel-like. But grabbing little bits of that white is really going to give that yellow a bright effect. And we're just painting bottom portion of the hat. I'm doing strokes that are kind of curving and contouring in that direction of the hat. When you do your strokes kind of curved style, it's going to give your hat a little bit of a 3D look just because your strokes are going in that curved direction. And as I'm loading in that kind of yellow and white combination, kind of varying this a little bit. So there's parts that maybe have a little bit more white and parts that have maybe a little bit less white. So it gives that yellow a varied look, so it's not all solid the same color. And occasionally I can grab just the white, just kind of blend that in a curved direction. The edges of the hat are kind of a little bit curved on the edges. Gives that hat kind of almost a wrinkled effect. So when you're done with that portion of the yellow, it's about like 1.5 inches of yellow, if you like to measure that, 1.5 inches to about 2 inches. And we're going to need to make orange. So this is Cad Red Medium Hue. And in order to make orange, we want to mix more yellow than the red. So about 1 part red to 2 parts yellow. And just like what we did with the yellow, we want to add a little bit of white in there to help with the coverage. So we're just going to paint another section with the orange. This one ended up being a little under 2 inches of orange, but that doesn't have to be exact. And again, grabbing like little bits of white in there, just kind of like blending it in on the side a bit to give that little bit of a color variation. Also, strokes are kind of going curved. You can darken your orange by adding a little bit more red into it. So over here on the right, I made that part of the orange a little bit darker and then kind of blended that in with the rest. And see how the edges are not exactly smooth, a little bit wavy on the edges of the hat to give it more of a kind of a wrinkled effect. A little bit more red over here on the right. It's going to blend with that orange to kind of give it more of a darker look. And for the rest of the hat, I'm going to do titanium white. So I'm going to rinse the number 4 round and grab some fresh titanium white. Put that on my palette. And I'm going to do the same thing with the kind of strokes that kind of curve in the direction of the hat. So we can fill this part in with the white. So the hat's it's starting to curve and bend downwards. So our strokes are just kind of going in that direction. Sometimes it helps to outline the shape first and then fill it in. And then right here starts to curl. So we can start at the end of the curl and then spiral that around and then go back up. I'm going to bring this part down over here where that orange kind of crept up. And if we wanted to do shading for the white, we can, or we can just leave it solid white. But if you wanted to do shading, you can grab a little bit of the raw sienna color and just kind of gently blend that in, or some of the orange. So I'll kind of demonstrate what I mean by that. So if I grab some of the orange or some of the raw sienna and just kind of like blended it in over here on one of the sides of the hats, gives that white a little bit of color variation, but not a whole lot. Or you can just keep it solid white. You don't need to go in that much detail with it. Next, I'm going to start working on the beard. So let's rinse the number 4 round brush off, and we need Mars Black and Titanium White. We are going to start by painting the first layer of this beard with kind of a medium gray color. This first layer is not really about the texture, although there's a little bit of texture we're going to kind of define here, but it's mostly about just painting the first layer of this beard, getting that shape filled in. So let's mix about equal parts black and white together. Maybe a little bit more white than black. It should be kind of a medium gray color. And let's start below the nose, and I'm just going to paint these kind of curved contouring strokes below the nose and below the hat. And I'm just going to kind of follow along underneath the hat, doing these kind of curvy strokes. So the beard kind of sort of almost parts under the nose, so we can kind of change the direction with that part that's right below the nose. So these over here on this side are kind of curving and going downwards towards the left. The opposite side, they're curving and downwards towards the right. But the pumpkin is covering most of that, the left side of the beard. So we only see it kind of curve towards the right for a little bit. And then we can just kind of like fill in the rest of the shape. So it's kind of like I'm almost sketching while I'm painting. I'm varying this color a bit. So you noticed when I kind of painted over my medium gray, I grabbed some more white, and this is more of that medium gray color. So we're adding a little bit of texture just by varying that color a bit. Although this is just the first layer, we'll go back in and add some more on-purpose texture when we are doing this second layer. So we just want to make sure that the shape is filled in. We kind of have the direction of the hair strokes. And I went around the arm, I went around the pumpkin, so we only painted part of the beard that we can see at this point. So the sleeve, the pumpkin, I tried not to paint any of that beard over those areas because I didn't want to lose that shape. So if we needed to, we can paint a little bit over those areas, but for the most part, that's still visible. We have a lot of texture kind of on the ends of the beard that's overlapping our robe, and we want to not really do that end texture yet because we want to paint our robe in first, let that green dry, and then we can go back over where the beard kind of overlaps the robe to give that more of that texture. So let's go ahead and stop there. So that's the first layer of the beard. Let's start painting our robe in. So we have Hooker's Green Hue Permanent. And I'm going to kind of alter this green so it's not just this solid green color. I want to make it kind of lighter, kind of more warmer. So I'm adding yellow into it. I'm adding a little bit of white into it, and adding a little bit of raw sienna into it. That's going to give it more of like a soft, almost of like a fall green or a foresty green color. So the proportions do not have to be exact. And I'm going to take this green, a little bit more white. I wanted to lighten it because the background is a little bit dark, so to give it enough contrast to be able to show up, a little bit more yellow, kind of give it more of that yellow-green look. And then we can start painting the robe in, a little bit of water to kind of loosen that color. Twisting my brush, make sure all that color is right there on the tip of the bristles, and then we can start painting this in. So pretty basic, kind of just outlining the shape, these strokes kind of going down and curved. I'm doing that color variation thing where I decided to grab a big chunk of yellow and I'm letting that blend on the canvas. It's going to give it more of like a lighter yellow-green color on one side, and then it just kind of blends to that darker color towards the left. So you can do the same. You can just load your brush in that different amounts of green and yellow. You can even incorporate a little bit of white into it and let that just kind of blend and vary on the canvas. More expressive sort of angled strokes to fill in that entire shape. I'm going to grab some more yellow and just kind of blend some more yellow over here on the right side of the robe. And a little bit of yellow over here on the left. And then we can paint his sleeve in. So by now, hopefully the gray in his beard is for the most part dry. So when I paint this in, I shouldn't have gray kind of dragging into this. But I can kind of define where his sleeve is. The sleeve does get a little bit more narrow towards the hand and a little bit wider towards the right. Then we can rinse, and I'm going to do another layer on the beard. So I'm going to go back in with some lighter color. So grabbing the white, we can still grab a little bit of gray into that, so it doesn't have to be pure white. When we go back over this and just kind of do more textured strokes, but leaving a lot of that dark still showing. So remember how it kind of parts right here under the nose? So the direction of the curved strokes kind of switch directions. Right here on the edge, they kind of stick out a little bit. And so we're just kind of following that shape of that beard down to add this other layer. And this is going to start creating this textured look in his beard. So it goes around the sleeve. Then I can grab some more gray. Kind of go back with that gray to add another layer. So it's kind of a lighter gray than that first darker layer. And then right here on the edges of his beard. So this part might be a little bit tricky because we just painted the robe. So we don't want to get green on his beard. So you might want to wait till the green on the rope dries, and then you can go back and then paint the little hairs that are kind of sticking out. Let's go ahead and paint our pumpkin next. I'm actually going to paint the first layer of this pumpkin white, kind of let that white dry a little bit, and then paint orange over it. That's going to give really good coverage for your orange and also make it very bright and vibrant. So I'm going to load some fresh titanium white onto my palette. I'll also load some primary yellow, and that'll be used later to create the orange color. And so this is the number 4 round brush, and what I'm going to do is just paint the pumpkin white starting in the middle. So we have this middle sort of oval shape. I'm going to paint that first, and then I'm going to work my way outwards and paint each little kind of ridge of the pumpkin. So that curvy line, curvy shape that kind of hugs that center oval. So there's one of those curvy shapes on each side of those ovals. I'm just kind of dragging my brush downwards in this curved direction. So that's going to start to give your pumpkin more of that shape. So you don't have to cover that purple 100%. In fact, I'm leaving like a little slither open, like right there between each of the pumpkin bumps. It's going to help you kind of define the shape of each of the ridges of the pumpkin. So there's one more curve right here. And again, you don't need to do 100% coverage. Our next layer, the orange, is going to end up covering any kind of purple left over. So we need to wait for this to dry a little bit. If it's soaking wet, don't go to this step, but if it's drying pretty fast, you can go ahead and mix your orange on your palette. So for the orange, I just went ahead and mixed the exact same shade of orange that I used in the hat, so that middle orange color. So mixing red and yellow together, but put a little bit more yellow in there so it's not too dark. And go ahead and paint it and start with your center oval shape and just do kind of this exact same thing that you just did with the white, only you're doing it with the orange and you're going over it. If there's a little bit of white kind of mixing in with the orange, that's okay. Then what we want to do is kind of alter our orange a little bit when we go to the next pumpkin bump. So I'm going to paint this one. I can either add more yellow to it to make it a little bit lighter, or more red to it to make it a little bit darker, or even add a little bit of white to it. We just want it to kind of stand out. So this one I'm actually adding a little bit more yellow to it. It's only a slight difference from that center one, but still I'm leaving that kind of like slither of white there between each of those bumps. So they still kind of stand out from each other. And then I'm going to do the next pumpkin bump. So again, adding more yellow to this one so that it looks a little bit different. I could add more orange kind of towards the right, but still leaving that kind of little slither of white, or if there's still purple showing through, you can see there's still a kind of a line that divides that up. And then if you're painting this and it just doesn't show, like each of them just kind of all look the same, we can always go back with like a paint pen and kind of draw some of those lines in between the pumpkin bumps, or even use brown or black paint to kind of define those lines again. And then in this far right pumpkin bump, I'm actually going to paint that one a little bit darker, so you can see how that just kind of stands out. And then over here, this little bump's kind of up towards the top, but the stem is going to end up covering that anyway. And then there's far right one over here. I'm just painting curved strokes from the top to the bottom, or the bottom to the top. Then before this dries, I want to maybe add a little bit of white into this. So I'm going to load my brush in orange and a little bit of white. So right here at the top, I'm just going to kind of stroke from the top to the bottom, a little bit of that light orange color that kind of blends. It's going to give that pumpkin a little bit of highlight towards the top, but also it gives it a little bit more form. And then we can do the same thing at the bottom. We can actually either add darker at the bottom and then kind of stroke up, or do lighter at the bottom. But I'm going to actually leave this as is, let this dry before really doing anything else to the pumpkin. I'm going to go ahead and load my palette with Mars Black and use the number 4 round brush to paint the boots. So just how we drew them in, we're just going to take the black and we can just kind of outline the shape of the boot and then fill it in solid black. So this one over here is on the ground. And the shoe on the left is meant to make it look like he's taking a step, he's walking. So this shoe is going diagonally upwards. I kind of drew it smaller than the original drawing, but it's basically the same technique, outlining and then filling it in solid. And then I want to do a little bit of detail work highlighting on my boot. So loading my palette with some more titanium white, and without rinsing the brush, I'm grabbing a little bit of white and then mixing it in on my palette. I'm gonna make kind of a darker gray color, or a medium to dark gray color. And I did the little heel on his shoe and the upper part of the sole of the shoe, or the top bottom part of the shoe, and a little curve on the shoe on the right for highlight. The next thing I'm going to do is add shadow under his shoes, and I like to do shadow by making kind of a watercolor consistency with black. So I'm taking the number 4 round brush and I'm watering down that black to a thin, almost watercolor consistency, maybe a little bit thicker than watercolor consistency because you don't want it dripping down the canvas. But the reason is to get it kind of thin so it shows up sort of translucent. And I just take that under his shoe and do very loose left and right strokes all the way to the bottom of the canvas. And for our shoe on the left, it's not going to start right under his heel because his shoe is up. So you want to leave kind of a gap below the shoe and where the shadow starts. The next detail I'm going to work on is the pumpkin stem. So we are going to load our palette with raw umber, and I'll be using the number 4 round brush. Gonna rinse that off and pinch the bristles. That's going to help get those bristles ready for this small detail, and load that into the brown. So on the bottom of the stem, so your stem needs to start kind of below the top part of your pumpkin. So you paint like this little curvy kind of webbed base for your stem, and then it kind of gathers up. And my stem, I'm going to have it kind of twist and curl down, a little bit different than my chalk drawing. And we can take a little bit of white and kind of blend that gently in to that brown just on one side, give that stem a little bit of highlight and texture. The next detail is going to involve using a POSCA paint pen. So if you don't have these paint pens, you can do this with a small round brush and black. But I'm going to go ahead. You can even do this with a Sharpie too. This might be super easy with the Sharpie. But we're going to draw our pumpkin face in. So I did 2 triangles for the eyes, 1 for the nose. And you want to keep in mind that the jack-o'-lantern's being held by the gnome, so it's kind of going up at an angle. So when you do your mouth, you want to kind of have it kind of curving upwards a little bit. So I did 2 pointy teeth going downwards, 1 in the middle going upwards. You can definitely change the style of jack-o'-lantern face on this, and you don't even have to do a jack-o'-lantern face. If you want him to just hold a pumpkin without the face, that's okay too. I'm going to take this paint pen and actually do some loose sort of outlining. It's not even outlining because I'm not outlining all over the lines, but just a few of those curves at the top and at the bottom helps to kind of give it a little bit more shape. Then we're going to paint the inside of what we just drew with our paint pen. And so we have titanium white and yellow. Mix those two together so you can get your bright yellow. If we just did yellow, the yellow wouldn't show up bright, but mixing white into it makes it show up bright. So if you're like me and when you're painting inside of this and it's covering some of those black lines, that's okay. We can always wait for this to dry and then go back and kind of re-outline what we need to re-outline. But the point of drawing it was so that we knew where to paint it in. So I'm just doing all of it solid, bright yellow color. I can even grab some white and add a little bit extra white towards the right side of the facial feature shapes. And so when that dries, I can go back and re-outline it as needed. I'm going to paint the hand next. So our hand is overlapping a portion of the pumpkin because he's holding the pumpkin. So I'm going to get my raw sienna and titanium white, mix those two together. And then I'm going to do a very simple mitten hand. So we have a bigger sort of oval curved shape, and then we see the thumb. So a little oval shape for the thumb. So there's not a lot of contrast right there because that color is so similar to the orange. What we can do is we can add more white to it to lighten it up, or we can let that dry and we can use the black paint pen to outline the hand, and that'll help get it to stand out. But just adding a little bit of white in there kind of helped with the contrast. Let's set that number 4 round brush aside and let's do another detail with the spider and the black paint pen. So for the spider, I just took that the part of the web attached to the end of his hat. It curves down, and then we have the little circle for the spider body, and I did 4 legs on each side for the spider. And then I decided to do the moon with the yellow POSCA paint pen. So you can do the same, or you can just paint this moon in with the round brush. And I recommend mixing yellow and white together so that your yellow gets really bright. But my colored POSCA paint pens don't get a lot of use, so I decided to use this one. Sometimes with these paint pens, you gotta like press down on the tip to let the color kind of go down into the tip of it. So that's what I had to do there. But I found this yellow to not be super bright. When it dried, I had to apply a second coat to it, and it ended up being brighter after doing the second coat. So you might have a different experience with it. But for me, it wasn't super bright until I did another coat over it. But I did like using it. I always mess up my crescent moons for some reason if I'm doing it with the brush. I did find it a little easier to use the paint pen to do the crescent moon. So that was just my experience with it. And then I did bats with the black paint pen. So same thing, you can use a Sharpie or you can use just the regular round brush and the black. But you do the little body and the little head and the little pointy ears, and then you do your wings, so like a curved shape, and then a scalloped lines under the curved shape, and then I just filled that in solid. The black POSCA paint pens always work nicely. Then I did a second bat. This one is a little bit smaller than the first one and going more at an angle. Feel free to add more bats to this. You could do more details. Suppose you can do like pumpkins on the ground or ghosts flying in the air. More bats. I am going to do stars too with the paint pens. Just fun to kind of fill up cute little details around the sky that are Halloween theme. So there's my second bat. And then I'm going to go back over my moon to do a second coat. These paint pens dry relatively fast. It might just be that this particular one is older. Hasn't been used in a few years, but it is a little bit brighter going back over that first coat with the second coat. I'm going to next use a soft wet wipe to gently erase any leftover chalk. So you just want to be really careful if you have wet paint anywhere. The paint pens dry super fast, but if any of this other acrylic paint, like the robe or the boots, if any of that's still wet, you just want to be really careful. But the wet wipe really helps erase all of that chalk residue very nicely. I'm going to do another layer on the beard, some more texturing, but I want to do it with darker color. So I kind of slightly watered down that black. I'm going to just go in here, very, very small marks that kind of contour and go in the direction of the beard to do some darker texture lines. And add a little bit of white in there to kind of make it so it's not super dark black. And then especially like the parts where we need to go over the robe, that robe definitely should be dry by now, and we can create some textured hair pieces that kind of overlap some of the green. It might overlap your sleeve a little bit, but for the most part, it needs to be going around his sleeve. So like right here, pieces that are just kind of hanging out, going overlapping part of that robe. The next thing I'm going to do is add some more green, some darker green into the robe. Taking Hooker's Green Hue, number 4 round brush. So down here in the lower left area and along the very bottom edge of the robe, just kind of gently adding. Some of that gray from my brush was still on the brush, so it's kind of mixing with that, but that's okay. Just kind of textured strokes on down here, just to give the robe a little bit more variety in color, so it looked pretty too solid with that green color. And then we can take our black POSCA. I'm going to outline our nose and the bottom part of the hat, just because and the hand too, just anywhere where there needs to be some contrast, like the nose and the bottom yellow part of the hat. They're very similar in color, but kind of outlining that helps to really divide that up a bit. And if you need to re-outline your pumpkin face, you can. That's what I'm going to do here. Sometimes it's tempting with these paint pens to just go ahead and outline everything, but you want to just kind of, so for the pumpkin face, I definitely am outlining everything, but parts of the gnome, I did not end up outlining all of it, just parts that really kind of needed more defining or standing out a little bit better, a little bit on the bottom of his robe. Another detail I'm going to add to his robe are little patches. So I'm going to do an orange square, a yellow square, and a white square to kind of go with the candy corn theme. So we're going to do our little squares first. And then when those dry, we can do our little stitch marks around the squares. I'm going to remake some more orange. And then I'll do another square that's white. So while those are drying, I'm going to do eyes on our spider and bats. And we can use a toothpick for this or just the back of the paintbrush. So I just added white to the back of the paintbrush and I'm just stamping. So I stamped 2 little eyes for our spider and 2 little eyes for our bats. Then I'm going to go back with my yellow paint pen and I'm going to do stars in the sky. So I know we did the splatter stars earlier, but this adds a fun, whimsical Halloween element to our painting. So I'm going to do this with the yellow paint pen. And then I did white stars with the white paint pen, and I will say that this particular white POSCA paint pen did not have good coverage at all. You can see how when I move my hand away, I'm having to do it multiple times to get it to show up, but it's very dim. I actually ended up kind of liking that effect. So some of these white stars are sort of like translucent. So they almost looked very subtle. Maybe if they were pure white, they would have looked too busy and taken up too much visual space in the sky. But go back over our moon. But yeah, the white paint pen doesn't show up super bright, but it might be a good thing that it doesn't show up too super bright. This is layer number 3 for our yellow paint pen. So yeah, it's pretty bright by now. 3 coats of paint pen for the crescent moon. And when our patches are dry, we can either use a paintbrush and black paint, or you can use the black paint pen to do the little stitch marks on the sides of each of the squares. So you can do 2, 3, even 4 lines if you want on each of the sides. And then next, I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting. So you can take that white and just on the far right side of the pumpkin face shapes, gives it a little bit of brightness inside the pumpkin face. And then a little bit of highlighting on the top of his nose, the top of his hand. And I'm just going back over this bottom portion where that outline kind of went inside of the hand. So I'm just touching that up. Another detail I did was add more stars, specifically with that white paint pen. You can decide how many stars you want to add in the sky. I'm just going to take the white pen and do a few more. And then one other final detail I ended up doing to this was add little pieces of candy corn on the bottom. So I did those with paint pens, and the white part I did with the white paint. I also did a little bit more outlining on the right side of the hat. So you see how there's like these kind of lines that go inwards. It gives it kind of that wrinkled look. But that is it. Feel free to add whatever details you want to this or simplify it. That's the conclusion of how to paint a jack-o'-lantern gnome. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.